My name is Christy Busby, and you are about to listen to the next episode of my podcast called F.A.T.E, From Atheism to Enlightenment. So come on in, join me. We're going to talk about it all, from atheism to enlightenment. Alrighty, guys, here we go. Get ready, and welcome to your F.A.T.E. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of F.A.T.E. How's everybody doing today? On today's show, I am bringing you Heather Regan Addis. She is the co-founder of the Mindfulness Association in the United Kingdom. She has a master's in mindfulness from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, and she is the co-director of the Mindfulness Association, or the managing director, I should say, of the Mindfulness Association in the United Kingdom, which I think is fascinating. I didn't even know you could get a master's in mindfulness, so let's talk about that. We're talking about compassion today, guys. What does it mean to be compassionate? And how can we learn to be more compassionate? Heather, welcome to your F.A.T.E, my friend. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Christy. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank
Good.
you for being a part of the show today. I think it's very timely to do an episode on compassion right now. I feel like there's so much turmoil going on in our world, not only globally, but I feel like everybody in their own right is going through some sort of trauma right now. Almost everybody that I talk to is having some sort of difficulty in their life. And you don't see a lot of compassion like you used to for people going through whatever they're going through. It seems that compassion is lacking overall in the tone and tenor of our culture and society these days. So I'm very grateful that you're coming on the show to talk about it. You do have a book, the Compassion-Based Living course, that we're kind of going to talk about what that entails.
Mhm.
But first, I always like to hear other people's spiritual journeys. How did you become the mindfulness, guru of the United Kingdom?
I wouldn't quite go that far, but um, so I worked as a lawyer, and I was a patent lawyer, and protecting people's inventions. That was my first career, and I was used to really organizing my life, and I planned things, and the plan came off. And then I had my daughter. She's 25 now, so that was 25 years ago. I had my daughter, and then everything was chaos. She was quite poorly as a baby, and I found I was blaming myself. I just couldn't figure out what it was I was doing wrong. So I decided, I got very stressed. I was finding it really difficult. So I started practicing yoga. And I used to sort of follow videos at home, and then there was a local class. And I went to my local class, and through that, I was introduced to Rob Nairn, who was my yoga teacher's meditation teacher. And he used to come to our town and do meditation sessions and weekends, maybe once a year. And I started going to these, and it was a complete revelation. What he was telling me about my mind just seemed so counterintuitive and different to everything else that how I thought my mind worked, how I thought the world was. And so I started following him and doing meditation. And my yoga teacher and myself, we set up a meditation group that used to meet every week at my house. And then over time, I was asked to start to lead those sessions. So then that took me off to Bangor University to study mindfulness. And then my yoga teacher, she planned a yoga weekend. Well, she planned for us to go on a coach to do a yoga weekend at the Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Scotland called Sami Ling. And I arrived there, and I felt completely at home, and thought, okay, so 20 years ago, 2004, I took refuge and became a Buddhist. And it was so interesting because my training, my first degree was physics and maths. Right. So like I was very kind of logical and scientific,
Yeah.
and then I had this legal career which is all very logical and then, all of a sudden I find myself in this world of like, you know, beautiful deities and prayer flags and chanting and so it was quite a change, but I just felt really at home. And one of my meditation teachers and the Tibetan Buddhist lamas that became my teachers as well, what they told me just seemed to be true. And then through meditation practice, I recognized actually what they were telling me was true. So that's kind of my story. Yes.
Let me ask you this. When you say, and I found that what they were telling me was true, what are you referring to exactly when you say that statement?
Well, the one example would be the way to skillfully navigate the mind. Though, and my meditation teacher, Rob Nairn, he had a model of the observer and undercurrent, which actually comes from Tibetan Buddhist Mahamudra training. Um, so, I mean, I lived with my mind my whole life and used my mind, for my work, but I had no idea how it worked. So, it became apparent that there's this undercurrent of thoughts that are arising in the mind all the time, and this observer part of the mind. And, the observer engages with the thoughts, and then we get caught up in thinking, and that puts us on automatic pilot. So, and often the thoughts that arise and the emotions that arise are kind of negative thoughts and emotions. I engage them and I get caught up and I become angry and I become sad and I become stressed. And so the counterintuitively, I was trained, just observe, just sit back and observe, allow the thoughts to display, allow that to unfold, and then change will happen of its own accord. So
Yeah.
it was things like that, that my teachers would tell me that what your mind works this way. I practice and I would go, oh yeah, my mind does, work this way. And I remember Rob Nairn, he always used to say, nothing wrong. Like John Kabat-Zinn, who's the father of mindfulness in the United States, he said, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than is wrong with you. But Rob
Yeah.
Nairn went further than that. He would say, there's nothing wrong. And I used to hear that and I used to think, well, there's loads of things that are wrong. Like all this is wrong. But now that's my own worldview. Actually, nothing's wrong. It is as it is. And, so it's kind of things like that you hear and you think, well, that can't possibly be true. You do a bit of practice. And this is why I believe in Buddhist ideas like reincarnation, because there's so many things that my teachers have said, and I scratched my head and I thought, well, that can't possibly be true. And then it is. So I think, well, I'll trust them on this one as well. Yeah.
I I think what a revelation it would be in the world if people could understand just exactly what you said as far as their level of happiness, their
Mhm.
level of being able to understand who we are,
Mm.
being able to monitor their own emotional experience in this world. I mean, it's it's one of the reasons why I'm out here talking about it is I'm hoping more people get on that train and start understanding many of these concepts so we can get to a better place, everybody, emotionally, physically, and whatnot. But today we're talking a little bit about compassion. And I'm wondering how do you define compassion and what do you think compassion looks like?
Okay. So the definition that we use in the book is attributed to the Dalai Lama, and it's a sensitivity to the suffering of ourselves and others with a deep desire to relieve that suffering. So
Mhm.
there's two aspects to it. One is being mindful and turning towards what's difficult, being with what's difficult without agenda. So not trying to pretend that the difficulty, the troubling thoughts or the difficult emotions, not trying to push them away or deny them, but really turning towards and being with that. That's the first aspect. So we become sensitive to our suffering. That enables us to be sensitive to the suffering of others. And then this desire to relieve the suffering. So the other part of the compassion training that we lead is to help people to cultivate the qualities that they need in order to hold their difficulty and respond skillfully to their difficulties. So our practices help people to develop qualities of kindness and warmth, of courage and commitment, strength and stability, and then wisdom and understanding. So these are all kind of characteristics of compassion that we cultivate during the training. And if we have those characteristics, then we are able to respond skillfully, not only to our own suffering and struggle, but to the suffering and struggle of those around us.
Working in mindfulness must be a really interesting l- um, perspective when it comes to human nature and how we act and how we behave. And let me ask you this. Do you feel like there's less compassion in the world today than, say, 50 years ago? And I'm wondering what your perspective is on that and how we can have what's your perspective on compassion in the world today?
Okay, so I do think that since the 1980s in the United States and the United Kingdom, we've moved into more of an individualist culture. And so, and we think it's like a zero-sum game and it's a bit dog eat dog. So I think that's problematic. And I also think that the social media kind of pits us against each other and prevents people, we're all in these separate echo chambers. So it prevents people of different views coming together and talking kindly about things. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that the media focuses on that all of the time. Always focuses on the bad news and all the separation and the difficulty in the world. Now, within the mindfulness world, the people that I engage with, many of them are very kind and they're in caring professions and they're looking after people and they're wanting to cultivate compassion so that they can do that better. And my other job, I work as a chaplain in the National Health Service, a Buddhist chaplain in the National Health Service. So I go onto the wards and I speak to patients, some of whom are in the worst moments of their life, some of them are at the end of their life. And what I see in the hospital is love and kindness. So the patients' love for their families, the families' love for their patients, the staff's care of the patients. So none of this is ever kind of on the media. So I do think there's a lot of kindness and compassion in the world. Most people have a natural tendency towards kindness. The neighbours that I have around me, and they'll help me if I'm in trouble. And so I think there's actually a lot more kindness and compassion than we think there is. But that's because, the media doesn't cover all the small acts of kindness that we're all doing for each other every day.
I completely and totally agree with you. I think our base instinct is to be compassionate, especially if we're seeing somebody go through something that is similar to what we have also endured in our lives, like certainly. But I do notice that, there seems to be going back to the media, I feel like they're making us lose the humanity in each other. Like we almost don't see somebody that is not of like us, doesn't think like us, maybe doesn't act like us, as less than human or not worthy of compassion or even the verbiage that we use for certain categories of people dehumanizes them. And I think that's completely and totally intentional.
Mhm.
And I think that people need to start recognizing that when they see it. And it's one of the things I want to get into on this episode. But let's talk a little bit about your course. You have a course in compassion. How does one start to achieve true compassion? You talk about our natural selfishness that we have, that is kind of like in default mode. So why don't we talk a little bit about how we can overcome that aspect of ourselves and evoke true compassion?
Yes. I think most people, when they're asked, do they want to be more compassionate, they would naturally say yes. But then often when they find out what's really entailed, as in turning towards what's difficult, they might be a bit less inclined. But we start with self-compassion in the training.
Mhm.
That's where we go first, and we we recognize that the human condition is a messy thing. We recognize that, these evolved brains that we have are not evolved for happiness, they're evolved for survival. If they were evolved for happiness, we'd all be really happy and we wouldn't have to practice meditation and compassion. But they're evolved for survival, and they're very tricky and they're biased towards threat and negativity. Um, and so that's the first thing we recognized. And we all have so much conditioning that we've picked up through our lives, the way we were brought up, the school we went to, the culture and society that we live in. We didn't choose any of that. And yet we find ourselves in this moment with this tricky brain that we have to navigate. So we recognize it's not our fault. We didn't choose this evolved brain. We didn't choose this evolved body. We didn't choose the family we were born into, the culture and society we were born into. Many of our life experiences we didn't choose, but here we are. So it's not my fault. Like, I'm a mess. My mind's a mess. Your mind's a mess. Everyone's mind's a mess, because it's the imperfect human condition. And when we start to see that, first of all, that normalizes the trickiness and the difficulty that we all experience. But secondly, it's a doorway to compassion, because we recognize that actually, yeah, I am a bit of a mess, but can I be a compassionate mess? Can I offer myself some compassion to this messy, kind of human, ramshackle collection of habitual patterns that I am? Yeah. So that's where we start.
I think that I, including myself when I say this, I think one of the hardest things that we um, should be doing is the self compassion part. I know I am incredibly hard on myself.
Mm.
I'm probably my biggest critic, my own worst nightmare, my own worst enemy. all, all of that stuff I am. And I have been really diligently looking to love myself, love everything about me,
Mm.
my shadow side, my imperfections, be kinder, speak kindly to myself. But I do think we live in a society now where everybody's kind of in survival mode. So I grew up in a time where people used to care very much for like the environment, the endangered species. I feel like people are so locked into their own survival mode that it's almost like they're not able anymore. They don't have any juice left
Mm.
to care about, you know, to care about animals, to care about the environment. They're like, I'm barely hanging on by a thread. I need to care about me and my family, and that's it. And I can understand that instinct, but how can we get um, our society to understand that having compassion for other people, it very much is works in tangent with law of karma, with
Mm.
these universal laws that will not only serve you in this life, but will serve you in other incarnations that you're going to have here. You don't get away with anything. Everything is going to come back to you at some point, maybe not in this lifetime, but certainly you will learn the lesson eventually in another part of your journey.
Mm.
So how can we start getting people to start understanding that we're all here having our own individual experience, our journey, some of which is pre-set up before we ever get here. What's your best advice to get people to understand that?
That's a complicated question. So
Yes.
I think that you're right in that more people are closer to the edge now. And I think
Yeah.
particularly since the pandemic, we've noticed with the students that we teach is that they're kind of feel a lot more threatened maybe than they used to. And so a key part of the training is resourcing ourselves. So we do practices where we place our hands on our heart or give ourselves a hug. So we use gestures of self-soothing. We have a practice from Chris Germer and Kristen Neff, who are psychologists from the United States, which is a soft and soothe and allow practice. And then we also draw on compassion-focused therapy, which was developed by Professor Paul Gilbert in the United Kingdom, Now, the co-author of the Compassion-Based Living course book is my colleague Choden. He's done a lot of work with Paul Gilbert, and so that here we're using our imagination to cultivate the qualities of strength and courage that we need to live in this world of wisdom, understanding, kindness, and care and strength. So, you know, that's a primary focus. So that, if we can feel safe within our skin, if we can feel kind of strong and courageous, then there's if we can feel resourced, then we have the capacity to be kind and compassionate to others. So kind of that's where we start. And we use a model from Mahayana Buddhism, which is the four immeasurable qualities, which is kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And so compassion practice inevitably requires us to face what's difficult. And that can be a bit challenging, if we're constantly doing that. So there's also an emphasis in our training on cultivating gratitude and appreciation. So lots of daily life practices around gratitude and appreciation so that we enjoy the good moments in our lives. And that's a big focus of the training. And that helps to counter the kind of negativity bias in the mind towards kind of threat and what's problematic. So that's a good first step that we can all take. And if we're feeling threatened all the time, if we are buying into negative thoughts all the time, then we won't be happy. But if we cultivate qualities like kindness and joy, and actually enjoy all the wonderful small movements in every day, then we'll become happier people. And who doesn't want to be happier?
I certainly do. I mean, I don't think our world has ever been more unhappy since I've been on it. Not in the history of humanity, but I don't remember ever in a time growing up, even with we've always had disruptions and globally, it's always been a thing. We love war for some reason. We can't seem to evolve past wars. Like I really thought like in the 90s, like, yeah, wars are going to be like something of the past, we're evolved now. I never thought in a million years that we would headlong right back into something that we know is going to be utterly destructive to our entire way of being on this planet. It's
Yeah.
like the dumbest thing. But anyways, that's another episode which which I'll probably have. But I would like to see people start understanding more that having compassion for other people and themselves is somewhat of a gift and something that we should be thinking about every day is being more compassionate. In my opinion, it's putting good energy into the planet. It's being loving. This whole journey really is about how can we be more loving, more compassionate, more selfless in our day-to-day lives. And the more I'm working and walking in my own spiritual path, the more that theme is just comes up everywhere. It's how can you serve others? How can you love each other more? How can you be more accepting? How can you learn not to judge? And I think compassion is a big piece of that puzzle. Um, what does healthy compassion look like? Is there something? Is there unhealthy compassion? What does healthy level of compassion in society look like to you?
Well, I think there's a lot of a lot of us were brought up to be kind to others, and we're never brought up to be kind to ourselves. So then that can lead us to being kind of doormats and people pleasers, and not have an ability to set boundaries and say no. And one fruition of compassion practice is often kind of an assertiveness and an ability to say no when somebody is, asking of something that's unreasonable or behaving in an unpleasant way or an unreasonable way. Then we're more able to have, the agency to be able to say, well, actually, no. And that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. and again, leads to more happiness. But there was just one other thing I wanted to say, and this was about, when people start our courses, often they walk into the room and they just look as if they have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and their faces are really kind of, like cropped and pinched, and they've got like furrowed brows, and, their sort of mouths really tight. And then by the time they get to the end of the compassion training, it's like this weight has been lifted off them, and their faces and hearts are more open, and they're more like glow and radiate. And often they look about 10 years younger as a result of that. So if anybody would need any reason to practice compassion and meditation, then looking 10 years younger might be something
Yeah. Yeah.
that might appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
I mean, I don't think people realize that it actually feels good to give.
Yeah.
It, I think that's a big missing piece of the why you should be more giving puzzle is like it actually feels good to do something else for someone else. It gives you a boost. It gives you an energetic boost. It gives you a self-esteem, self-worth, makes you feel good about yourself. And then, you start attracting more and more and more of that into your life. So it's interesting.
But
Um,
can I just, can I sort of talk
yeah,
to that
yeah,
a little bit?
sure.
Yeah. One of the practices that daily life practices that we do on the course is random acts of kindness. So we become like a kindness ninja. And so we just take any opportunity to do like random acts of kindness and just notice what it feels like to do that. And it makes you feel great. And the other
It
thing
does.
is that, if you do something kind for somebody else, the research shows they're much more likely to do something kind for the next person. So kind
Yes.
of it ripples out. So like, your act of kindness, like if you let somebody into traffic in your car, then they're more likely to let somebody in. And like if you walk along the street and you smile at somebody, then they're more likely to smile at the next person that they see. So,
Yeah.
and therefore it ripples out. Yeah.
It's true. Try it out there, gang. Try that. Be more compassionate. And I think another part of the compassionate puzzle is having the ability to look um, from another point of view that is not your own.
Mm,
There are so many perspectives out there to be had. And I think one of the reasons why there's so much misalignment with each other is because we really do all see things from our own
mm,
programming,
mm,
from our own lens, from our own perspective. We're not capable of seeing things from other people's perspective. And it makes us be judgmental of each other instead of having compassionate for somebody and understanding maybe they had gone through something in their life that inevitably led them to whatever they are today.
mm.
You know, have compassion for what other people are going through in their own journey, and I would love to see more of that in the world. Um, in your book, you talk a little bit about something called striking of arrows. So, how do we cause ourselves more suffering through resistance and it's called striking of arrows. What is that? I thought that
Okay.
was interesting.
So we talk about the three arrows, and it arises from a Buddhist sutra where a warrior is hit by an arrow, and rather than allowing themselves to be looked after, all they're concerned about is who shot the arrow, why did they shoot the arrow, how terrible that this person has shot the arrow. Yeah. And so we do that to ourselves. So in life, there is inevitable pain. So, difficult things happen. We're all sick some of the time. We all lose people. That's the inevitable pain of life. And that's like the first arrow. And that's kind of bad enough. But we don't just stop there. When something difficult happens, we then talk about, oh, this is terrible. You know, um, why has this happened to me? This is just awful. These things always happen to me. And we kind of ruminate and we just make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And an example I often use is like if I'm sitting doing my meditation practice and I have a pain in my knee, and I think, oh, I've got a pain in my knee. So I've got pain in my knee. So I could just be with the pain in my knee. And that's one thing. But now I think, oh gosh, what if this pain gets worse? I might have to have an operation on my knee and I have to be in a hospital and I might not be able to work and then I might lose my job and then I'm going to be homeless. So you've gone from a pain in the knee to homelessness in just a few jumps. And we really buy into these stories that we're telling ourselves. So that's the second arrow. So the first arrow is the pain in the knee, which is maybe 10%. And then all the ruminating and the difficulties, like firing a second arrow at ourselves that hits the tender part where the first arrow is already hit. So we have the difficult thing that's happened, and then all the ruminating and thinking about it and elaborating and catastrophizing that we do that makes it like totally worse. And that's like 90%. Yeah. So, and then there's a third arrow that we fire at ourselves, which is that I'm not good enough. So, difficult things happened. This catastrophe might, I'm imagining this worst catastrophe. Therefore, there's something wrong with me. And that's the third arrow. Those second two arrows, the second and the third arrow, are completely optional. We can just simply move with the first arrow. I can simply sit with the pain in my knee, breathe into it and breathe out of it and just allow it to be. Difficult things happen in life. So you have to live it. So you have to live the 10%. So the 10% authentic pain in life, you have to face it, you have to be with it, you have to experience it without agenda, come to terms and allow and accept. And if you're able to do that, then you're spared the whole of the 90%, which comes from the resistance to the initial difficulty. And Rob Nairn always used to say, my meditation teacher used to say, there's no exemption certificate. You have to really feel and be with and allow that 10%. But if you're able to do that, then the whole of the 90% of the self-created suffering that comes from the way we think about things, that's completely optional. So then you can live the 10%. And boy, I can tell you, that's so much easier than living the 100% of the full catastrophe that otherwise we would be living.
And that's so everybody does that. We really are our worst enemies when it comes to that. We really are. And it also goes back to being more of an observer of your, whether it's a pain in your knee or a negative emotion, is being able to clock it, recognize it, maybe analyze it, maybe use a little bit of your critical thinking skills to think about how exactly you should be responding to whatever stimuli you're responding to, rather than just letting your emotions take you on these fantastical journeys of death and destruction.
Yeah.
you know, which is what most of us do.
Mm.
Who, what type of people are coming to take your course? Who do you see showing up at your door? Is it a mixed bag, or is it kind of a certain type, or who do you see showing up at your Mindfulness Association door?
So often they're people that are kind of are a bit older. So,
Okay.
maybe 40 years onwards. So we do have some younger people that come. And the majority of people that come on our training are women.
Oh,
Yeah, there's not so many men come on the training. I mean, we do have men do the training, but I would say it's probably 2/3 to 3/4 women. And so less men seem to be attracted to, mindfulness and compassion training. So
well, that's a whole nother podcast right there too,
yeah,
as to why that is,
mm,
because I don't think compassion is gender, related. But I feel like in our society we make it gender related in
yeah,
a really weird way. Like, to be compassionate towards somebody is a weakness for maybe the male perspective in our culturally in our society. I think that's a huge problem. Um, I think having compassion, protecting other people is very much a noble and strong way to look at yourself, and not weak. But go ahead.
yeah. Well, and if you think about those qualities of compassion that we talked about, so there's courage and commitment, strength and stability. So, they're quite hard qualities. Often we think that compassion is a really soft thing. And sometimes it is like the kindness and the warmth. Sometimes compassion requires us to be soft and kind. But sometimes compassion requires us to be assertive and to step in and say no and say it's not going to be like this. So, I think there's a big misunderstanding. People think, oh well, if I become more compassionate, I'm just going to be a complete pushover. But that's the opposite is absolutely true. That people become more able to live authentically according to their values and have the agency to do what they need to do to live in accordance with their values. So that's
Yeah.
what we actually see happening, and that's what's happened in my own life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that having compassion also is about protecting other people. They're not as strong to
Mhm.
stick up for themselves. It is having empathy for somebody who might not be in the same sort of powerful position. You can, like you said, step in and say, no,
Mm.
this isn't and protecting somebody. I think that comes from a deep well of compassion for somebody else that isn't quite, isn't capable of doing it on their own.
Yes.
So I think we definitely need to have men out there that have, the qualities of being a compassionate person, because right now men are still ruling the world for better or for worse. I think they're doing a terrible job personally, but that's where we're at until the ladies out there get our turn, which I think it's coming.
Well, let's.
I think there's going to be a rise of the feminine divine for sure. You
Mm.
know,
Yes. Yeah.
I can't wait. Where can people pick up this book? And is this book something that is a companion to the course, or how is this book laid out for people to learn about compassion, to learn about, how to become more of a compassionate person without losing themselves or who they are, or self-sacrifice? What
Hmm.
do you
So first of all, you can find the book via our publisher, Collective Inc. Um, and you can also find it on Amazon, and you can order it there. But if you want to order it from somewhere else, you can get the details of the book and go into your bookshop and they'll order it for you. So you can get it, you can get the book. And the book is laid out chapter by chapter as a course. So each chapter builds on what comes in the chapter before. So there's things to read, and there are guided practices. So in the book, you get access to a web page that has all the guided audio on there. So you can listen to the guided practices, and then do some journaling. And then when you feel that you have kind of integrated the learning from the practices for that chapter, then you move on to the next chapter. So you might spend about a week on each chapter. Yeah, so it's very systematic, the training, building on what's gone before. We start with self-compassion, and then we move on to compassion for others. Yes. And there was one thing I was going to say in response to something you said earlier, Christy. So,
Mm,
something about like understanding other people's perspectives and like stepping into their shoes. So, one of the practices we do is a meta practice, which people will be familiar with, like a loving kindness practice, where you bring to mind different groups of people and say kindness phrases for them. And this might start with a dear friend, then yourself, then somebody that is neutral, so you see them on the bus or in the shops, but you don't really know them. And then we come to the difficult person, and then we come to like, more, wider and wider groups of people. But particularly in relation to the difficult person, if we can say these kindness phrases for the difficult person, it often gives us insight into where that difficulty comes from. So people behave badly because they're suffering. If people are happy, they don't behave badly. So we can gain some insight into that. And then we have another practice that was popularized by Aura Glazer called aspiring, dissolving, and equalizing. And in the dissolving step, we say the loving kindness phrases for the difficult person, and then we imagine stepping into the shoes of somebody who really loves that difficult person. And what is it like to relate to that person from the shoes of the person that really loves them or really likes them? And that enables us to recognize that there's this person. Some people really love them. Some people don't know them or don't relate to them in a positive or a negative way. But we really don't like this person. So what is it that's in us that's being triggered by this difficult person? So these practices, like the kindness practices and the aspiring, dissolving, equalizing practices, they're really good to do. Like, if you're coming up to the festive season and you know that you're going to be spending time with family, and if you have some family members who are really quite, that you find irritating, doing these practices in the run up can be really helpful, because they remind you of your intention to be kind, but they also enable you to get some insight into, what's driving them to be how they are, and what is it in you that's really triggered by that. And then my experience is, when you then go to these family occasions, things go so much smoother, because there's
Yeah.
so much more understanding. And we've reminded ourselves repeatedly of our intention, that actually what we want to be is kind. We don't want to be confrontative. Yeah.
I'm finding that more and more as I walk this journey of spirituality, intention is so powerful.
Mm. Mm.
If in mindfulness is so powerful, to be present in the moment, to be aware of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're saying, having these intentions is so much more powerful than people can imagine.
Yeah.
And it's a practice though, man. Like, there's plenty of people that trigger me, you know? It's not easy. There are people that I would consider to be very difficult,
Mm.
very triggering. Um, and it is a challenge to be kind, especially because I came from being kind of a harsh person. Like, I don't hold my tongue, very well and whatnot and so on. So I do find myself um holding back and taking a beat more to
We're
think about how I want to approach someone, especially when I'm aware that their behavior is irritating, annoying, triggering, or otherwise to me. It's definitely it's a practice for sure.
absolutely.
Um
We have this idea that the obstacles are the path. The challenges are what we learn from. And one of the biggest challenges are the people in our lives that kind of really trigger us. They're the ones that we have the most to learn from. So there's an opportunity
yeah.
for personal growth anytime there's somebody like that in your life. And rather than thinking, oh no, I've got to spend the day with this really challenging person, you can think, oh, okay, this is my curriculum for today. This is my compassion curriculum. Today I'm having to respond to this person. How am I gonna, how am I gonna prepare myself to then kind of engage? And then there was
Yeah.
something that you just said about intention. And I think that intention is so important. And intention is a significant way in which we can actually exercise our free will. My intention, really reflecting on what kind of force do I want to be in the world? What kind of
Yes.
qualities do I want to manifest? What kind of values do I want to live by? And in the Mindfulness Association, every single meditation that we do, we start with our posture, and then we reflect on what's my intention for this practice. Because then you trust the intention to guide the practice, because you've set that very clearly. It might be to be present, it might be to be kind to myself, it might be to cultivate qualities. But, we set that intention at the beginning, and then we allow that to drop into the back of the mind, trusting it to guide us through the rest of the meditation practice. So, intention, living intentionally, as you say, is really important and
It is.
powerful.
And powerful, I I don't think people understand how impactful what you're thinking, what your intentions are. You should be not on autopilot. You should be in your body, you know, fully aware of what you're thinking, feeling, and how your intentions are. I think very much that what is going on in the interior of body is going to show up on your exterior world
Mhm.
in so many ways. And for me, it's been the biggest life hack I could have possibly
Mhm.
been turned on to, because I have changed my behavior in so many ways, and it's starting to reflect. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not like you're going to have a good day and your life's going to get better. It's a practice of understanding that dwelling in negativity or in emotions that don't make you feel good
Mm.
are not going to bring you your highest and greatest good in life. They're just not.
That's
It does not serve you at all to
right.
live in that space. It only serves you to really live in a lighter, more loving, more accepting, more compassionate way. And that is going not only to serve humanity, but it serves yourself.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it does. It is a self fulfilling wheel that you put yourself on when you start considering other people's feelings, considering other people's needs, and helping others. It's such a weird thing because I think people aren't compassionate to each other because they feel like they're going to have to give up something of themselves to be a truly compassionate person. And the secret is if you're compassionate and giving, it really adds to your own life and what you're doing here and the level of it will touch every single way in your life if you be a giving, loving person. It just does. And it makes you feel good. It gives you a boost. Um,
So because
Heather,
oh,
go ahead. Go
and
ahead.
the Buddha's taught about karma, and that if we
Mm,
plant positive seeds in our mind stream, then positive flowers, grow. And I mean, as you were saying, that's certainly been my experience over the last 20 years. So many wonderful things happen in my life now, and so much serendipity, so many amazing and wonderful coincidences and opportunities, and I don't go looking for them, but they just manifest in my life. But because I'm present and open, I see the opportunities and I can move in that direction. But it's like it's actually feels sometimes quite magical. I'll just tell one story. So
yeah.
I used to have I had two lovely dogs, and they both died in 2023. They were very elderly, and I've kind of had a bit of time without the dogs. I've been traveling a lot more, and then I was thinking, okay, when it gets to this summer, I'm going to get myself another dog. And then I went away on a holiday at New Year to a farm, and they had a litter of puppies. They had a litter of Labrador puppies, and they said, "Come on, choose a Labrador puppy." And so, I ended up with two because my daughter chose one. Then her boyfriend talked her out of it. So I ended up with these two beautiful Labrador puppies, and they just manifested in my life. And it kind of wasn't what I was planning. It was a bit earlier, but it's been absolutely perfect timing in relation to other things that have happened in my life as well. And now I have these beautiful beings in my life. These things happen. And my daughter said to me at the time, she said, "These things always happen to you, Mo."
Yes.
And the reason I put
Yes.
it down to is 20 years of practicing mindfulness, kindness, compassion, and do my best to share that with others. Yeah, it's like a miracle.
That is 100% right. I believe that. I've noticed even the transition in my own life. I certainly haven't been doing this 20 years, but I have noticed that the synchronicities,
Mhm.
constant synchronicities. Um, if you pay attention to the universe and you kind of like get into your own energetic field and open yourself up to that, you will start experiencing very magical things that we're just walking around the earth unconscious. We are. We're walking around like zombies being led by whatever we're watching on our screens or on our phones, not cognitive at all about the other um the other things that are going on around us that we might not necessarily see but exist nonetheless. And I'm trying to like wake people up to understand that there's so much more going on around us than what we think there is.
Mm.
And there's so much more magic in the world than what we like to admit. And maybe we've danced too far in the direction of scientism and we need to pull it back a little bit and understand that the metaphysical nature of our reality and that intention is real. Our words have power and compassion will come back to you 10 million fold if you step into that way of being. It is a gift that will keep on giving. I'm working on it. I try to be as compassionate as I can. I think my biggest trigger is when I am dealing with somebody who is not of great intelligence. I don't suffer fools very well.
Mm.
They just make me a little crazy. But I'm becoming more chill, you know? It's not my journey, you know? It's their journey, and
Mhm.
everybody has their own thing they have going on, their own path, their own way of being, their own biases that they probably came down to the planet here with to resolve and deal with. And everybody should just take a breath, take a beat, be more compassionate for someone that is not like you, that is going through something that you have no idea what they're going through. And always keep that at the forefront of when you're out there in the energetic world, which I feel is more chaotic than ever,
Mm.
more filled with despair and hate and all kinds of negative emotions that you should not get yourself bogged down in,
Yeah.
like that's the last thing you should be doing. Heather, I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about compassion. I think it's a topic that should be talked about more often. It is it's starting to feel like it's something that does not exist very much in our society anymore. And I would hate to see our humanity lose its compassion for one another. It's so key in a functioning world. If we're ever going to get beyond all of these things, all these challenging times that we're in now, we need to have compassion more than ever, even to somebody that you absolutely do not agree with on anything. You should have a level of compassion for them that they're on their journey and it's not your journey, man. I'm going to put all of the book information in the show notes. What about your university? What if somebody over there in the UK was interested in is there a mindfulness university to attend? Like, is that an online thing? Like, how does it work? What is that?
Well, you say the UK, but we have quite a few students from the United States. We have students from around
Oh,
the whole of the world. So we have a partnership with the University of Aberdeen that's been
uh-huh.
running for 15 years, and it's a master's degree in studies in mindfulness, and it's part-time over 3 years. And it can all be
Okay.
done distance learning, although there are some in-person events that you can attend. So we run them hybrid, so people can either come and have like a retreat weekend or a retreat week, or they can do it online. And the first module is mindfulness, the second module is compassion, and the third module is insight. And for each of those modules, where there's an experiential meditation training, mindfulness meditation, compassion meditation, insight meditation, and then there's an academic study of how mindfulness, for example, might be applicable in your professional context or in your life
Mm.
context. And there are some reflective assignments as well, where you're reflecting on your experience and linking it to the evidence base. And then the second half of the course is about research methodology. You continue with your meditation practice, but you learn research methodology so that in the third year, you're able to write a dissertation or a work-based project. So anybody can apply for that at the University of Aberdeen. We're currently recruiting our 16th cohort of students that will start in September, and it's a great course. And one of the advantages of that is you go through this whole like transformative process with a cohort, and you make friends for life.
I love yes, I love that. Keep doing what you're doing, Heather. I think it's so important. We all need to have more compassion in our lives. And I really appreciate you coming on and being a part of the Fate podcast. Keep me posted if you do any more books or you want to promote anything. Come on back and see us, and I'd love to talk more. Tell Choden hello. We
Oh,
actually, full disclosure, we had actually tried to record with Choden as well, but it didn't work out, so we couldn't have him back on the show with us. But Sen Chodon, my love, he is a real deal Buddhist monk.
Wonderful.
So I found him to be fascinating, and I'd love to have you guys back on sometime.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Christy. And please keep doing what you're doing, spreading the word about, kindness and compassion, presence. Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm doing what I can to raise the consciousness of this planet. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Fate. We will see you next week. Journey well, everyone. Bye bye. And that is a wrap on this episode of Fate, from atheism to enlightenment. I want to thank Heather for coming on board today and talking about her compassion-based living course. I thought it was a good time and a good topic to discuss compassion. What is it? And I loved the self-compassion part of the journey. And I think before you start trotting down the path of wanting to be compassionate to someone else, turn that compassion inwards and be more loving, more kind, and more compassionate to yourself. It will inevitably lead you to be more compassionate to others. I know that I am in the process of trying to love myself, accept myself for who I am, for all of it, forgive myself. I think forgiving yourself is a huge thing in life. And I think when you can forgive yourself and let go of your mistakes, let go of, all of the many things that might have been self inflicted pain along the way, it is going to help you to become a more well rounded, more grounded, and more compassionate person in life. I have noticed that I don't see a lot of compassion out there in our culture. I do feel that it is looked upon as being weak. I think we go to our own camps. We look at each other as enemies, it seems, these days, especially in the United States. Unless you think, feel, act like I do, you are not worthy of compassion, I guess, is the line of thought for most out there. The dehumanization of each other through the media and through our social influencers and what is kind of huge right now. And I think compassion is looked at as a weakness or not important. But a compassionless society leads to very poor outcomes, I'd like to remind everybody. And we all need to do our part as far as being more understanding, more compassionate, and um, less judgmental of each other. I said it on the show. People have their own path, people have their own perspectives. Just because you don't understand somebody else's journey or how they think or who they are, it doesn't mean they don't deserve your compassion, doesn't mean they don't deserve your empathy. I am taking my own advice here. I could be pretty harsh on people. I would, you know, I do not suffer fools very well. And if you're in that category, I might, in my past, been a little bit harsh, a little bit chewed you up and spit you out a little bit, for lack of a better term. And I don't want to be like that anymore. I want to have compassion for people, even if I don't agree with them, even if it's not how I would behave or how I would think or how I would do things. It's not my journey. And as long as they're not hurting anyone else, I'm by no means thinks that if you are physically, mentally, or emotionally harming somebody else, I am definitely one of those people who would step in and stop it. I've always been like that since I was a very young. And I always will be. I always step in and protect people that aren't strong enough to protect themselves. That's a level of compassion. It's a level of um, empathy for somebody. And I'm all for that. And that is not a sign of weakness. I think compassion very much is a sign of strength. So it was a good topic to get into. It's hard to show compassion all the time. We're all busy, we're all in self survival mode. Everybody is just trying to do the best they can with the immense amount of stress that they already currently have in their lives, whether it be financial, health, family. There's no shortage of people going through their own trials right now, it seems. But to take a beat, to think about your emotions, to ground yourself, to set intentions, to understand that being more compassionate and being more loving is only going to bring better stuff into your life. It is a bit of a life hack. When you are more loving, more kind, more compassionate, you're going to see things flow better in your life. It is synergistic. It's all the same thing, gang. So, compassion. Let's get back to it. Let's start disengaging from the rhetoric and understanding that we're all here for a limited amount of time to experience life here on the 3D plane and learn what we're here to learn. Get out there, find your soul purpose, and figure out what your passion, what gives you joy, and you know, spread a little love and compassion on the way. That's the lesson for today, kids. With that, we will see you next week on Fate, from Atheism to Enlightenment. And if you want to follow the show, I'm on Instagram at F.A.T.E podcast. Follow the show. Starting to get out there more. Starting to get into my social media groove as best I can. You know the drill. Welcome to your fate, everyone. I'll see you next week. Journey well. Bye-bye.